Let's take a look at two of our first DTR big events from this past weekend. First is the DTR Win a Case. This was an online tournament hosted in Yeti's Discord. We're just going to talk about pretty much the top 8 decks. There are a couple other decks, but a lot of them were similar, and some of them weren't too surprising in terms of like new stuff happening. So we'll stick with the top 8 for this one. First off is Fragmented Fire Specter Crux Merlin. That's a mouthful. So this is just essentially Fire Merlin with the Crux package, and has the Fragmented Spirit as a part of the, as the starting spirit. This allows them to glimpse, look at, and try to find their Rile of the Abysses or Creative Shocks early to really start gaining value from their graveyard. Playing Fragmented Spirit used to be a little scary, especially last set, because so many people were on stuff for Fantasia hate, such as Scatter Essence or Disenchant. But since now Fire is now the new big bad, a lot of people are now no longer teching for Fantasia hate, because Fractals also got hit because of Lost in Thought being banned. So now people are going to, take those out of their deck and start moving towards some kind of graveyard hate specific. So because of that, Fragmented Spirits definitely are, in a better position from last set. There's nothing too crazy about this list, material deck or main deck wise. The only unique thing, and now that we have a new Divine Relic, is the Looking Glass being the Divine Relic for this deck instead of something like GCR or Quicksilver Grail. This allows the player to use the new Sword of Shadows, which is essentially a 0-cost 2/2 once you are Warrior. So level 1 and level 3 that is attacking for 2 as long as your opponent doesn't have a stealth unit on board. As far as main deck goes, they're running the standard Merlin level 3 package with, Incarnate Majesties, Ghost of Pendragons, Crux Sights, Ascensions. Ascensions is now coming back into the meta. We will now probably see Prismatic Edge in a lot more Merlin decks because they're able to use that Ascension and use that water card in memory, even if they don't get to discard it for later on in the game, because it's a card that allows them to draw off Ascension instead of just dealing 3 damage or hoping your opponent has a wind or water card or something like that. So definitely a little bit more value out of Ascension. Essentially, it's like a free deal 3 damage, especially if you do it fast speed on your opponent's turn or in your recollection. It doesn't take any tempo on your main phase, so it's just a really solid addition to having the deck. So the deck is playing Ascensions, it's playing Incarnate Majesty, it's playing Ghost of Pendragons, and Crux Sight, because Crux Sight is so good with Ascension. The second place deck is Ensoul Lorraine. Everyone's been talking about this deck. It actually ended the same record as the Fire Crux Merlin. So technically, neither one did necessarily better than the other. Just tiebreakers is reason why one got above the other. But the Ensoul Lorraine playing a couple unique cards, nothing too crazy. It does run Erendite as your blade, so it's a really cool sword that you can bring out. And if you have a float or more than one float in the graveyard, it's actually going to pump that sword a lot, which, with the additional swings you are getting from Votive Runeblade, that's actually quite the buff or quite the addition to the deck. So that's a really cool card to add in the deck. The deck was also in the main board running stuff like a Null Spell. This is just to help with any kind of, stuff like Fireballs or Incarnate Majesties from, a Merlin player, or any other spell, allows you to have a negate in the deck that Fire doesn't normally have, especially Lorraine or Warrior in general. The next deck I'm going to talk about is Fire Fractals Daochan. So now that Water Fractals has gotten a lot weaker, Fire Fractal Daochan, is starting to see a little bit more play. It was really decent actually in last meta. It just was outshone by Water Fractals. And actually in the very first HVN Ascent in Seattle, it was played there also by a couple of the chess club members and a couple other people. And so it's a strong deck. It's an aggro deck, so it can get a little hard to finish out the game if you don't get there early, but still a really cool deck. It's not playing anything too crazy in the material deck, mainly just draws and ways to get around like stuff like Smoke Bombs and Nullifying Mirror and a couple protection cards like Safeguard Amulet and Terraforming. As far as main deck goes, I won't really talk about it too much. Again, it's playing the new Ignis Deus, which is a new UR from DTR. Allows you to essentially level up at fast speed, but only from Spirit to level 1. Kind of cool, it's allowing you to not have to level up or use materialization for a level up. Now you are going to minus a card while playing it, but it can also have some surprise factor that your opponent wouldn't necessarily expect to occur, which is really a neat addition to Fire aggro. The fourth place deck is Fire Suited aggro Zander, I guess. So we've seen fire aggro Zander, we've seen fire suited. You know, we used to see fire aggro Lorraine, and now we saw fire Lorraine suited. So it makes sense that this would be something someone would mess with and kind of figure out to see if it would work in Zander, because Zander does have a lot of really solid fire aggro options. Obviously, they get Poison Dagger, which is huge in a lot of decks, and of course, you know, the option to materialize a Mercenary's Blade, also really good. And out of the sideboard of this deck, they are playing Incapacitates, which with a deck like Suited, where you're not necessarily super aggro all the time, sometimes you are just like almost like an allies deck, having Incapacitates can be huge. Having, you know, you're really trying to build up a board, so it makes sense to play Poison Dagger, because you want Poison Dagger on board, and then you can, with your allies, you know, go for a decent swing turn where you're dealing a decent amount of damage. One really unique, two actually, I guess, unique cards I'll point out. One is Mortal Ambition. So Mortal Ambition, you have a lot of unique human allies, so it makes sense to actually kind of have this in the deck, and especially as a kind of a gotcha or to save your allies, because it does give them 1 health, or, you know, using it to help you trade off on board, or if someone's going for attacks, which this meta definitely seems to be higher in the attacks, you know, like with stuff like CL and Diana, and obviously other ally decks, or anyone that's attacking in general, and even Crux Knights, you know, and Crux in general, they're attacking more. So having the ability to protect your board and allowing them to retaliate, especially when they are attacking, can be really, really good. So pretty cool to see that. And then another card is Mad Tea Party. Now, Mad Tea Party, it is a interesting card. If not dealt with, it can provide a lot of recovery for your champion. You know, obviously, at worst, if you play it, you're essentially healing 6 or recovering 6, because they have to spend 6 attack into it, other than, you know, and with that instead, they would have normally just gone to your face. So it's really interesting to see this in a aggro deck or a fire suited deck. I do get it though, because you are putting so many allies on board, so you can gain a lot of resources from this. And you know, in general, if someone's just playing small little allies, this really slows them down actually, and so it can do a lot for you, and that's why it's only a 2 of in the deck. So obviously it wouldn't be a 4 of, that'd be kind of a bit much to have a full 4 play set, but like if you have it on certain turns, definitely can help save you and keep you alive, especially at, you know, if you're only going level 1 like this deck does with Zander, then it makes sense in that case too. The 5th place list was Serene Luxem Zander. So this is another one of those decks that everyone kind of expected, because Ryle is so good, and Luxem Zander definitely feels like one of those decks that as soon as you get 1 or 2 +1s, you know, basically additional value from while you're leveling up, the deck just feels so strong. So Ryle of the Abyss being a +2 in a single card definitely helps this deck a lot. Now, they definitely get hurt by Censor, so it's something to be a little, you know, careful of, because if someone brings out Censor and you don't have a way to get rid of that, it can slow you down a decent amount. But the fact that Ryle, no matter what, replaces itself, might not matter too much. You know, Zander has definitely had those times where they've gone to level 3 only netting even, and they still can win games. So it's the games where they +1, 2, 3, 4, where the game just gets out of hand, and since this deck with Ryle of the Abyss really can do that, it's going to happen more and more frequently. So this is definitely one of those decks that people expected to happen. Everyone, you know, tested Ensoul Lorraine right away, and everyone's like, wait, what's another really good level 3 deck other than Merlin? Oh, it's Luxem. So Luxem makes sense that we're seeing it at a high mark in this tournament, because it's just one of those standalone decks that when they get value, it is inherently strong. Next is Fire Tristan Suited. So not going to talk a lot about this list. It's very similar to the Fire Suited Zander list that we just talked about earlier, doing very similar things. It is playing incaps in the main instead of the side, and their whole main material deck pretty much is a lot of draws and a couple of tech cards, you know, stuff like Terrafring and Censor, and then, you know, Smoke Bombs, Poison Dagger, Merc Blade. The works. It's a general aggro deck, but it's using Suited as its main core. So other than that, nothing too crazy. It's running Rendings, because, you know, if you get a couple of those Fire Suited allies in the graveyard, you can utilize them for a decent sized Rending Flames. Makes sense. Again, not going to talk about this list too much. We've seen it. We've seen Suited. It's definitely an actual archetype, you know, not just a meme, and this is a deck that utilizes it well. The 7th place deck is definitely a more unique deck. So this is actually Fire Aggro Specter, or Fire Aggro or Fire Specter allies with Lorraine as its main champion. So I'm going to break down this deck a little bit more than the other ones, because Other ones don't seem that crazy or, hard to think of or, unique that people haven't been talking about already in the meta, especially part of the Discords or whatever. But I will talk about this one a decent bit. So this is a Spirit of Fire Lorraine, level 1 and level 2 with Looking Glass. So it plays both Sword of Shadows and Inert Sword, essentially 2 different swords that have 2 power and 2 attack. And then it's playing draws. It's playing the Baubles, it's playing Drawn Blade, and it's playing Smoke Bombs to obviously for aggro reasons to get through some taunters or interceptors, and then Censor because of Rile Abyss decks. It is a little weird in this deck because they are themselves on some Specter, Rile the Abyss package stuff. So they have the Undying Dreams, they have the Liminal Guides, and they have the Evercurrent Raiders. This deck essentially is just trying to get some value while also building up a board and doing the general aggro stuff that Fire Aggro Lorraine has always done. So, it's running the Arthurs, it's running only 1 Blazing Throw, only 1 Fire Momentum, but it is running 4 Home by Fire and 4 Rending Flames, and then it's running Red Hairs and Zhao Chaos, but it's really utilizing that Rile the Abyss and Creative Shocks to get a little bit of value, but then go for these big Rending Flames. I'm thinking that's what it does. It's also running Cheshire Cat because we are Distortion with that Looking Glass. We can ignore distortion typing, the element requirement for the distortion cards. And so that's obviously a decent beater when you go Inert Sword, because Inert Sword has initial 2 power to it. So we're able to do decent rendings with either Sword of Shadows if they don't have a stealth unit, stealth ally on your opponent's board, for 2 attack there, and then Hone It. That gets 4 attack, then Rending Flames, that's 7, and then Rending Flames doubles it if you have 3 fire cards in the graveyard with the on attack, and that goes to 14. So it's I think it's just trying to essentially put a bunch of fire cards in the graveyard, like Fire has always done, and then really utilize those for decent sized Rending Flames every single turn. I think it's also running that level 2 Lorraine and 2 Flame Sweeps just to deal with something like suited allies, or maybe if some other ally deck that people aren't necessarily thinking of, it has that ability to clear that board and just obviously get a bunch of value from the level 2 on enter, draw a bunch of cards. So this is a kind of a unique deck. I do like it. I think the main thing is that it's not going to play 100% like your average aggro deck, and it's just going for these more unique kills that we've seen in the past, where instead of, it can do that turn 2 play of maybe just getting the perfect Rending Flames, Honed by Fire, and Blazing Throw, but it has other options within its kit. The next deck and the last deck we're talking about, the 8th place deck, is Win Tristan. So this is another one of those decks that we expected to see part of the meta, so nothing too surprising. Tristan was strong last meta. It won Worlds by Taylor. Congrats to him again, but it's another one of those decks that has the ability to be really strong when you know the meta. And so if this deck prepared, and Wind in general prepares for some kind of graveyard based deck, or something that really relies on their graveyard, gets a lot of value from their graveyard, such as Rile the Abyss decks, or even suited decks, if they, for Queen of Hearts or Fire Aggro decks, because they want fire cards in their graveyard, then this deck can perform really strongly in that kind of meta. The one thing that's hard about this deck is that you need to find those hate cards that can actually affect the graveyard. So Cleansing Reunion is a really good card. This deck runs 3 of it in the main, but you need to see 3 of those, or probably all three of them in the game, because you need to have them for when they put those cards in the graveyard, and you need to be able to activate it pretty much on the moment they put those cards into the graveyard. If you don't see it, they're still just gonna get the value off of it right away, and it didn't matter that you had Cleansing Reunions in your deck at all, and then you just get outpaced and out-tempoed. So it can be really hard to have this deck perform super well. It probably does decently well across the entire meta, but obviously, if you're not seeing those Cleansing Reunions, if you're not doing the right turn with the Censor that's running in the material deck, and putting that on board early enough, you're probably, again, just getting out-tempoed, out-valued, and they're just going to get to their level 3 with a bunch of cards, and there's nothing you can do about it. I will, however, say something that's really good, and I've talked about this in a couple other videos. I believe in the last video I did, similar to this, talking about some of the meta decks that we're going to see, and early on in DTR, is that Veiling Breeze, really solid against Ensoul, and Incap can be really good against Ensoul and or Majestic Spirit, or any of these other action cards, because Incap is just a negate to action cards, and it allows this deck to have a lot of different little outs if your opponent isn't paying attention to it. Now, the Ensoul decks are running Spellword Scepter, so with that on board, they can't have their Ensoul negated, but Veiling Breeze, if you have a couple win cards in your memory, definitely stops a lot of damage from Ensoul. So definitely a lot of playability with this deck. You need to see the right cards at the right time, otherwise it's going to feel really lackluster, but if you do, you're going to have one heck of a time. Let's talk about the Quicksilver Cup. This was an 80% event that happened in New Zealand this past weekend as well, and I want to give a quick shout out to my boy James, who took down the entire event with what they lovingly called Kentucky Fried Suzaku. Essentially, this deck plays a little bit of the Specter package. It plays, obviously, Guo Jia and getting Suzaku on the board, and then killing it off with a couple of cards to gain that on-banish effect where you can bring it back and essentially attack again. So, really cool deck, really neat idea. Let's dive into it. So the material deck is level 1 and level 2 Guo Jia. It has Sensor in there, it has GCR, it has Safeguard Amulet, Smoke Bombs, Sword of Seeking, Tariff Ring, Viridian Protective Trinket, your Suzaku, and Impact Hammer. This is nothing too crazy of a material deck from as far as Fire Aggro Guo Jia goes. Level 2 is a little unique, but it obviously allows you to gain quest counters to bring out your Suzaku faster, maybe draw a card or a little extra health. Makes sense. I think it's mainly there for getting that, obviously, couple extra quest counters to get your Suzaku on board. This whole deck I feel like it's about cycling and putting fire cards in the graveyard fast and obviously getting quest counters. So it's running Rile the Abyss with a couple of Specters with floating memory. So one with floating memory, one with liminal guide, and really cycling and putting a bunch of cards in your drop into your graveyard to gain the exact hand you want, so you can go for a multi attack turn with your Suzaku. So really cool, unique little deck. Obviously, it's fire aggro as well, so it has some other playability and ways to deal more damage. But the key cards to the Kentucky Fried Suzaku part is Peppered Chef. Peppered Chef is a new 2-drop 2/1 ally that allows you to sacrifice another ally, and it gains +2 attack that turn. In combination with Suzaku, this allows you to swing 4 with Suzaku, play Peppered Chef for only 2, kill off your Suzaku, it gets banished, you pay the 3, bring it back, swing 4, and then swing 4 with Peppered Chef. That's 12 damage with technically 1 card and your Suzaku on board. That's pretty decent. Other than that, it's playing, Fiery Interference, which is a great card for Fire Aggro. It essentially stops your opponent from recovering, so your opponent's about to go for a large recovery of some sort. It's going to prevent them from doing so, and then also, because the Ruby Fate Stone gets quest counters, because when you deal non-attack damage, that Fire Interference is also going to allow that to happen as well. So it's essentially kind of like a Sparkle Light in this deck, but better because it's stopping that recovery from happening. So that's a really, really solid card in the deck. It's also playing 3 of Hearts. I'm assuming this is just another cycle card for the deck. You play 3 of Hearts, you pay 3 and essentially just get to cycle 1 card. This could be really solid to do if you want to put a liminal guide in the drop, another floating memory in the drop, or obviously any kind of fire card into your graveyard, especially something like Vengeful Paramour, which is another one of those Specter cards we can discard off of the Rile of the Abyss, and allows it to come back and, if you pay the 4, to deal damage to your opponent as well, which again would give you another quest counter. So a lot of internal synergies with the deck, a lot of cycling with this deck to really set up your hand and really push damage in at the same time. The second place list is Serene Fire Specter Luxem Zander. We talked about it earlier. I won't talk about anything in depth again. It's a strong deck. It's playing very similar stuff to the one that placed 5th or 6th place or whatever it was in the DTR win case. It has Striking Illumines, so did the other one. It has Rile the Abyss, so did the other one. Again, nothing too crazy with this list. It's a really strong list that, that can get to level 3 and have that backup of a Serene Spirit lineage release to recover 6. Next is Fire Aggro Guo Jia. Now, this is not the Kentucky Fried Fire Aggro Guo Jia. This is a very unique list. So this list played, material deck aside, it's playing a couple unique cards, but I will say it's playing Sadie. So it's playing 4 Sadie as an ally that I'm assuming is just that one you can protect and put back into your hand. It's playing 2 Thieving Cuts to use those preparation counters you're getting from Sadie. And then it's running Also, for Flickering Cinder, which is a 1-cost, deal 1 damage to a unit, and then your champion becomes distant. And then it's playing Infernal Mana Streak, which is a new Aether Charge spell that allows you, would load into a Aether Wing weapon. There is one Aether Wing weapon in the deck. It's just a 0-cost 1/3 weapon, Aether Wing weapon that this can load into. Kind of an interesting card and deck to put into this. I mean, it's like it's playing a little bit of preparation counter generation. It's playing a little bit of distancing, for your champion and using Aether Charge spells and weapons. And then it's playing Suzaku and quest counters as well. And then it's playing a little bit of graveyard stuff as well, because it's also playing Intensified Pyre, which deals 2 damage. And then if your opponent had 8 or more cards in the graveyard, deals 6 damage instead. And it has Kindle 3, so a little bit of Kindle synergy there. It's also it's running Planet Explosives for those preparation counters as well. It's a pretty big reason as to why it's running that. The Sadie and also the Assassin Mantle in their material deck, which is, for those who don't know, I'll read this card for you. If your champion would take damage, you may banish Assassin's Mantle, and if you do, prevent 1 of that damage. Put a preparation counter on your champion if damage was prevented this way. It's a 0-cost regalia item that you can run, so you can essentially guarantee it if you bring it out to get that preparation counter, because Suzaku, the Fabled Ruby Fatestone, is dealing 1 damage to yourself every single turn. Or if you bring out Impact Hammer on the same turn that you have that out and attack with it, then it's going to do it as well there. So a couple ways to trigger and gain that preparation counter guaranteed. And then Planet Explosives, it's just a 2-cost deal 2, but if you have some prep counters, it's going to be a 2-cost deal 4 sometimes. So you can gain some value that way. Kind of just a really unique list. I can see this list being a little inconsistent depending on the hands you draw. Sometimes it's really good because you just have exactly what you need and everything's lining up perfectly. And other times it might feel a little clunky because maybe you draw the Flickering Cinder that's going to give your champion distant, and then you also draw the Thieving Cut or Planet Explosives, which on their own is fine. A lot of Guo Jia decks have just played this type of, obviously just deal 3, or in Planet Explosive just, deal 2 damage at fast speed. So not the worst, but it could feel a little lackluster and you could be playing other better stuff in your deck. The 4th place list was Ensoul Specter Lorraine. I'm not gonna cover this list again. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows what it is, what it does. It does a lot of damage on 1 turn. It can make a Ensoul not, be negated with Spellword Scepter. Really good deck. Definitely, know that's in the meta. Check it out. Learn what it does. I don't need to harp on it too much longer. The next list is Fire, Aggro, Specter, Distortion, Graveyard. Fire Graveyard deck, I guess. This is a deck that is playing Looking Glass, and instead of something like GCR, so a little less ability to gain tempo from your material deck as far as draws go, but it is playing stuff like the Inert Sword and Sword of Shadows, which are obviously really good swords to be playing. It is playing Cheshire Cat, which is a really solid ally. If you have Inert Sword on board with your Cheshire Cat, you have a 3-cost, 3 power, 3 life ally with Spelled Shroud and Stealth. That's a really good tech slide. So pretty cool card in that case. And deck I had choice for that as well. And then it's also running a small Spectre package. So it's running Rile the Abyss. It's running those liminal guides. So some free allies if you get those in the graveyard before you go level 1. A lot of Fire Aggro Lorraine decks definitely can stay on level 1 for a longer time than other decks. If they're just in general, you with your allies, people have to focus on dealing with your allies instead of dealing damage to your face, because if they don't, then they just lose quickly. So you're definitely going to have a little bit more time on Spirit than obviously any other deck would. But it's also running a lot of cycle cards. So, we have Creative Shocks, we have Rile the Abyss, and we have Red Hairs, plus our Arthurs, and March Hare, the new Fire unique ally, human ally, the 1-cost 1/1, that when you put this in your graveyard and you essentially use Kindle and use that card for Kindle, it'll come back onto the field. So March Hare is, active and loses pride more often than it used to. The 6th place list was the exact same thing as the 1st place list. I won't cover anything about it. Check out the 1st place list. The 7th place list, very similar to the 5th place list. There's another Fire Aggro Lorraine with that Spectre package, with the Distortion Looking Glass package, and just Fire Aggro Lorraine package, all crammed together. So It looks like they're very similar lists, maybe a couple cards difference, but essentially the same decks. And the 8th place list is Win Tristan. So again, I just talked about this in the DTR case. It also ended 8th place in the DTR Win a Case tournament. It is essentially just Win Tristan. It has end caps. It has Veiling Breezes. This one is not playing Cleansing Reunion in the main. It's playing it in the side. Other than that, it has Crystallized Destiny, which can stop some big attacks from happening. But it's just Win Tristan. We've seen it from last set. We saw it at Worlds. We saw it in the DTR case, Win a Case tournament. It's definitely, like I was talking about earlier, it's a decent deck if you know the meta and you can build your deck to really fit the meta. Otherwise, it's going to struggle a little bit when you don't find those tech pieces for the meta. And that's it. That's all the decks we have, all the main decks, I should say, from those tournaments, the top 8 lists from each tournament. If you're curious about any of the other lists in the tournament, definitely check out sylvie.gg. That's going to have all your options, events and all the other lists in there that you might want to see, all the other statistics, how much fire, how much water, how much, warrior, assassin essentially was played in those tournaments. Guess what? It's a lot of fire. Most of those tournaments had mostly fire in them, but that's it for the video, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.